Okay, never rely too much on technology. Standard setting, just coming back to this, what looks more like a funny side, but there is this truth in it. We have standards that are relevant for performance on the individual level and on the societal level, and we have to keep in mind that as well the performance is a reaction to the expectation. Again, this problematic that the entire discussion on the GDP is, of course, an important discussion, that we need this increase, but at the same time we have to think about what does it really mean. So if we have this orientation, the GDP is the standard measurement of societal wealth. It is like telling the fish that it's stupid because it cannot climb the tree. There are other issues of wealth that are important for further consideration. Now we come to the aggregate expenditure, which is very similar to actually the GDP, meaning we are again dealing with CIG and NX as an amount, as sum. And we are talking about what is the expenditure, the aggregate expenditure within an economy. With the two dimensions of the GDP, and in this case the real GDP, and then linking to how much do we actually spend, what is the expenditure. Ideally, it translates to the straight line 45-degree going upwards, meaning zero real GDP means at the same time zero aggregate expenditure. And this increases step by step and equivalent. Any increase you have in terms of the real GDP is as well an increase of the aggregate expenditure. In life, we usually don't face ideal situations, but we have to do something with reality. If you remember what I said earlier, inventories play a role when it comes to GDP. They are important as well when it comes to reality. So the real line of the aggregate expenditure is not the same as the ideal line. In very simple terms, you can say people buy more than they can buy, meaning they buy more, they spend more money than they have. Or the other way around, they do not spend all their money and not all products and services are bought. The 45-degree line or angle is disturbed. It's not this equilibrium which we would like to see, but in reality we have a situation where people spend more money than they have. Now the question is, of course, how can they do it? How can you spend more money than you have? One thing is very simple, you get a loan. You literally get a loan from the bank, or you get a loan from yourself, so to say. You have had savings and spend the money now because you have it from what you saved earlier. The other situation is the production of more goods than are sold. So an enterprise, an economy, produces more goods than there are actually sold on the market. Again, it is a contradiction to what we said before, equilibrium. Supply and demand, demand and supply, you will only produce as much as you can sell. This was the basic assumption of economics. You won't produce more. There is one general exception, that any enterprise today would not, or not nearly any enterprise, does not produce on demand. I mean, it is not about one customer coming there and saying, I need this and that amount of products. I want to buy 20 tables. Of course, this happens, but the usual situation is, the standard situation is, that people, that enterprises produce more in expectation. We talked about this factor, in expectation of what they can sell. The expectation is, to a large extent, depending on market analysis, on marketing, and this again depends very much on previous experience. For the summer months, you won't produce boots, especially no boots with fur. You won't produce heavy coats and jumpers. You have T-shirts and light dresses. It's a very simple thing. And this is, of course, something you would have the expectation if the infrastructure in terms of roads is improving, you will be able to produce more cars. So this is the expectation, starting from previous experience and starting from the analysis of conditions you can analyze, at least to some extent. So you produce more, a kind of buffer, that you say, in case that there are some people buying, and I did not expect the 100% correct demand, I still have something in stock and can provide this. Inventories. I put this somewhere, it is available, but it is not produced immediately for the market, immediately for being purchased. This is the area where I can say it is a buffer in case that there are more products needed that I actually produce that are going out to the market. I have this inventory and can say I still have some reserve here and I can put this onto the market. So loans, on the one hand, I buy more than I can buy from the money I actually have, from the income. Windfall profits, I get some money from somewhere, unexpected. Finding it on the street, or somebody makes me a present, and it's more generous than I thought it would be. I buy more. or I buy less than actually products are on the market. This is the situation where inventories play a regulatory function, that if people want to buy more than is on the shelves, I used this metaphor, it's always possible to get it out of the inventory and put it onto the market. Now, if this is the case, what is the implication? What is the implication for the producer? If I am producing computers and I sell for the last 10 years, I sell every year 5,000 computers. It's probably not a realistic figure, but I sell every year 5,000 computers. Now, the new year, for whatever reason, I can sell 6,000. As I said, I have some in the inventory, I can take them out, but at the same time, I have this idea, there's something on the computer market, more people buy computers. So what do? I produce more computers in the expectation that this increased demand is a lasting effect. It's not due to the floods that destroyed computers in a certain areas and they have to be replaced, but it is due to the fact that more people go to universities and all want to have a computer. And that's happening every year. And then you can actually, marketing, you look at the birth rate, you look at the number of people going to university, is it lasting? So you adopt to these new conditions. As producer, the information is get it out of the stocks, get it out of the inventory, and produce more. Because most likely you can sell more. If we look here, where I produce more, then I can actually sell, the situation is different. On the one hand, I produced it already, so I can't change anything about it. I put it into the inventory, because of course I don't want to dump it. But at the same time, the information I get is, hang on, there's something wrong with the computer market. I sold, last 10 years, I sold every year 5,000, and now I sell 4,000. For whatever reason, it's not, again, this individual case where I can say, yes, of course, this happened, and this is why people don't buy anymore. It may be a shift in income. People have less money. Computers are not really necessary, really needed. So people say, okay, I can do without it, and I won't buy this. It's not you and you and you, but it is the aggregative figure. The population at large, the group of consumers, my target group of consumers, that is limiting, decreasing the demand. So what do? I keep it in the inventory. At the same time, I say this seems to be a lasting effect. I don't see another income exchange that's for higher incomes. So what I do is I reduce production. There is no point in continuing. I mentioned the equilibrium as an ideal form of the entire market ideology or market system. And at the end of the day, I'm back to the equilibrium. I have a short-term fluctuation, short-term change, but at the same time, I have adapted to the new conditions, so I'm back to the equilibrium. Now there is one effect to it, and that is the limits of substitution. Limits of substitution. I don't know what happened with these slides.
Because the slides are too large.
You'll get the slides anyway, but something cut it simply off. So it's limits of substitution. And we talked about the effect of substitution at an earlier stage, when we said on some level, in terms of foodstuff, there is no way of substituting food by tables. I need something to eat. But at the same time, within this category of food, I can substitute something and can say, instead of eating rice, I eat noodles. Instead of rice or noodles, I eat bread, because it is cheaper to do so. It is easily available. It's the same with luxurious products. We talked about all these issues in detail when it came to elasticity. Now, I don't want to talk about elasticity here, but what is important, there is this general idea when we go to factors of production in the widest sense. We have goods, we have services, we have labor and capital. And there we find as well a factor of substitution. In particular, when it comes to labor and capital, we can substitute one by the other. We can say, if the cost of labor is very low, there is no need for substituting labor, meaning variable capital, by machinery. I can simply employ people and don't need these expensive machines, because labor is so cheap that it still pays out to have people doing the actual labor. The other way around, if labor is extremely expensive, then I can say, of course, it is more profitable to replace human labor, to replace variable capital by constant capital, meaning by machines. The machine, the equipment, is more productive than human labor. And we are not talking simply about the technical dimension of productivity, but we are talking as well about the productivity in terms of money spent. I always invest money, invest capital. This is the money I spent, and I want to see a certain output, an outcome. I invest, I don't know what, 1,000 units, and now I can divide this between how much do I spend for labor and how much do I spend for capital in terms of machines, in terms of raw material. And the simple question is, where is it spent in the best way in terms of bringing me the highest return? So it's productivity as matter as well of profitability. It is not simply how much is produced by 100 workers and by 50 machines, but what is the outcome? How much do I have to invest on the one hand, on the one side, and how much do I get out per invested unit on the other side? It's again something where we have easily this misleading idea of course, if somebody invests more, it's a good thing, there is a higher outcome. The question is, where, for what is it spent? Is it invested? And what do we actually get out of it in terms of the goods and services produced? Of course, it's getting complicated at some stage, not least when it comes then to combining as well goods and services, because it's always a question of the quality involved. So you can replace many services by goods, but if you still get the same quality, is a different story. And it can mean that the quality actually increases, and it can mean that the quality decreases. It depends on the concrete situation, and it depends on what do we actually expect from the service to be. I have had at some stage this experience. I thought I'll definitely miss the flight connection because there was only very limited time. And this airport, wherever this happened, I don't remember, was completely automated. There was basically no person dealing with the passengers, and you only had to show your boarding pass to a machine, and it was reading the barcode, and it was taking a photo, looking at the photo of this, the photo taken, and the photo of the passport. Okay, go. Gate opens, and you go. If people do this, it simply takes longer time. So I got my flight. But this is as well something where you can replace and where you have to put the different things together. Quality, quantity, and the quantity differentiated in terms of labor and capital. There is another dimension of the substitution, and we talked in some way about it in connection with comparative advantage. Markets, production and consumption are, at least today, barely a matter of national settings. Things are produced somewhere, things are consumed somewhere. The place of production and consumption is not identical. And this is as well, or again, something where we can substitute things. We produce something here solely for export, or we produce something here for domestic consumption. And this is the same with the stuff we import. we can import things and replace basically domestic production, or we say, no, we will produce it on our own. This is a permanent debate in economics. What is the better thing to do? The simple, namely simplified answer is produce and export goods, because that's always good. You sell stuff, you don't buy stuff. The simple form, you only export. You can be very cheap because you are not depending on people in the country buying the stuff. So you find always somebody who buys it. That's a very simple and simplified answer, because of course you have to have this balanced. The domestic population needs some things for consumption. You can't export all the rice and you don't have any rice here. If you build cars, you can't produce all the cars here, export all of them, and nobody has a car here. Going on and going on, you can take whichever product you want. And some of the products are, of course, not available in the country, so you depend on the import, in particular raw material. In small countries, it doesn't make sense to have a large company for cars. If you have only a small population that potentially buys cars, there is no point in having your own car manufacturer. So the not so simple answer is, how can you balance it that on the one hand you sell enough, balancing it what you buy in another country, making sure that the population of the country, meaning the domestic demand, is satisfied. So the three factors: balance between export and import, and the satisfaction of the need of the population. This is actually something here currently in China, where you have exactly this reorientation, if you want, of how do we deal with an economy that was predominantly, or to a very large extent, oriented towards export, and at the same time was very much depending on certain imports. Things had not been produced here. And now there is this shift. We produce in China, and we don't produce for people, I don't know where, around the world, but we produce for Chinese people. To some extent, it's simply impossible. As I said, if you don't have certain raw material, you can't produce it. Comparative advantage, if you have raw material, but it is extremely expensive to get it, then it may be better to import it. This is one side. Another and economically more difficult side is, what do we do with the income? The income has two dimensions to it. We talked briefly about it in connection with Fordism. Henry Ford, mass production of a certain type of car, making it possible, this was his idea, making it possible for every American to buy this car. Now, what is the problem with this? The problem with it is that if I produce, labor is a cost factor. I have to pay the workers. As more as I pay, as higher the cost are. If I have a wage of 10 units as producer, it's good for me if I compare it with having to pay 20 units. Because 20 is more, 20 is cost, and that reduces my profit. This is reducing my return. But at the same time, cost is income for the worker, and the worker is purchasing the products I produce. So how can I do this? How can I deal with this situation that I have to pay you as little as possible, but you still should be in the position to buy as much as possible of my products? How can I manage a situation where ideally I don't want to pay you anything, but I still want that you buy my car? This is obviously not possible if I don't pay anything, but how to get to a kind of balance in this process, this is the difficult situation. In some way, we have a tension here when it comes to the question of macro and micro. For the microeconomy, meaning for the individual entrepreneur, income is only a cost factor and should be as low as possible. That's for the individual enterprise. Any money I spend for workers, for machines, for raw material is cost. And I want to avoid it.
Sorry, please repeat for individuals and the enterprise income should be lower. You said in micro and for enterprise and individuals, the income should be what?
No. The income for the individual enterprise, that's the idea, should be as low as possible.
Which one?
Low. I want to spend as little as possible. It's all cost. I have to avoid cost on the micro level as individual enterprise. At the same time, on the macro level, the consumption of goods depends on people spending money. So, on this level, there is some sense of having high incomes for people because then they can consume the goods that are produced in this economy. Now, I can say to some extent what I mentioned before. Okay, I pay low cost, I pay low wages in the country and export things. Because then people in another country, they can buy it. And this is a situation which we have had for many years, that it was possible, at least to some extent, to have this kind of rebalance. But at the same time, it means that there is always, that there is a permanent situation of debt. People buy and buy and buy and buy and buy, and they have to spend money. From where do they get it? They have to produce something. And they have to sell it. If they sell it to themselves, they buy the products of another country and buy their own products. So how is it possible to get so much money that we can buy our own products and the products of other countries? If they are really, really low priced, it is not possible forever, but for a relatively long period of time. But at the end of the day, we get into this trap of indebtedness. We cannot always spend money without getting money in return. So it may be in this case you export some goods, you import other goods, and in this way you have the balance. But this is not really the solution, the overall solution to it. In the long run, you have to have a balanced exchange system. You produce, you export as much as you import, and at the end of the day, it means you only or what you balance, what you produce, is that it is looking after the domestic needs of the population. So in a market system, you do not produce what you consume, you produce it for the market, but the economy, meaning the domestic economy, produces for its own population. Produce for the own population. We produce what we need. We may get some help from others because we don't have certain raw material. We do not have certain knowledge that is available in another country. So substitution there for something we do not have. But at the same time, it has to be balanced at the end of the day, because you cannot go this way and say, we endlessly export. You can do it for some time, because you find for some time enough people who buy. And this is a second factor, you can do it for some time, because you still manage that the domestic demand is satisfied, is answered. As I said, this is a decision today in China, but as well in other countries, because we have this huge synchronization of the economic cycle, that at the moment there is no country that is able to buy and to buy and to buy, which was the case for some time. And at the same time, we have in many countries a change of income that actually increases demand. So if you look at China, you have, due to the previous development, higher incomes, higher resources, and people don't want to save it, but people want and can spend it. So this is the question of adaptation. And then we have to think, coming to substitution, as well to this question of the limits. Capital is dead labor. That, vampire-like, only lives by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. The problem here is that any capital, any machine you have, any raw material you put into the process of production is depending on previously invested labor. In this way, it's dead labor. It's labor that had been performed previously. As I said on another occasion, the real value production, the real process of generating value happens with V, with living capital. Put a machine somewhere. Put your computer, switch it on in the night, at nighttime when you go to bed, just 5 minutes, and say, for tomorrow, write the essay. The computer won't even answer. And the work that is done in the morning is nil. There is nothing done. You have to use this machine, and of course you can do it more productively with a computer than handwriting. Maybe. You can do it in a different way. You have your information there. You can look something up on the internet. You don't have to go to the library and look into the books. This is a certain way of higher productivity, but at the same time, the machine as such won't do anything for you. It helps you to do things, but the real value is what you do, meaning your labor. And this is the problem. If you spend too much, if you invest too much money into capital in terms of machines, the profit may increase, you may get a higher return, but the rate of profit decreases. The rate of profit is calculated by relating the investment to the overall investment, but how much do I actually get, how much value do I get, how much return do I get from living labor. This is the important part. If I increase constant capital, if I increase the investment into machines, I can do it up to a certain point, but the rate of profit will always decrease because this depends on the living labor. This is very important, that all this, what is usually called rationalization, investment into machines, is a good thing in some way. It saves human labor, but at the same time it reduces the profit I get out of it. Not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. So we are talking about the composition of capital, and this is what I mentioned earlier. It's C to V, it's constant capital, which is on the one hand machines, on the other hand it's raw material. What I invest here and what I invest into variable capital, meaning the human labor. To some extent I can vary this. As I said, if I have cheap labor, I can invest more there. Maybe competitive, maybe not competitive, and I have to invest in machines. I may be competitive by investing in low quality raw materials, but it is as well something that is limited in terms of the qualitative outcome. So you have these two dimensions of the composition of capital, technical and organic. And you see again, coming up, this difference between use value and exchange value. This is something you have to basically understand. What do we produce? Is it use value? That's the technical side here. Or is it exchange value? I don't know if, I assume this thing doesn't work anymore. So we come to a close here, and we'll see, I think, next week continuing from here. Thank you.